Port Haven, Oregon, clung to the edge of the Pacific like a stubborn barnacle. Its cliffs loomed over crashing waves, and its streets buzzed with the hum of fishing boats and tourist dollars. But beneath the postcard charm lay a city shaped by old money in the timber mansions up the hill, new money in the glass towers downtown. Victor T. Langston owned a chunk of both. At 52, he was a real estate tycoon who'd turned Port Haven into his personal chessboard, moving pawns, tenants, councilmen, cops with a flick of his wrist. The trouble started with a tenement on Wharf Street. 6 stories of peeling paint and leaky pipes, it housed 60 families who paid rent they could barely afford. Victor saw dollar signs. Raise it, build condos, cash in. When the tenants fought back, led by a single mom named Maria Torres, he didn't blink. Eviction notices went out. Locks changed overnight. Belongings dumped on the curb. Legal? Barely. But Victor had lawyers who could twist the law into knots. Maria sued. Fraud, harassment, illegal eviction, the charges piled up like driftwood. The case landed in Courtroom 3B of the Port Haven Circuit Court, presided over by Judge Abigail Foster. At 34, she was young for the bench, with sharp hazel eyes and a reputation for cutting through bullshit. Victor didn't care. He'd faced judges before, old men with soft spots for campaign donations or a good scotch. This one, he figured, would bend or break. On a rainy Tuesday in October, the courtroom smelled of damp wool and coffee. Victor sat at the defense table, his tailored suit a stark contrast to Maria's thrift store blazer. His lawyer, a slick shark named Ethan Brooks, was mid-argument when Victor leaned back, smirking at Abigail. "Your Honor," Ethan droned. "My client acted within his rights as a property owner. The tenants were delinquent." "Delinquent?" Abigail interrupted, her voice crisp. "The leases show payments made on time. Explain the lockouts." Victor chuckled loud enough to turn heads. "Come on, darling, it's just business. You wouldn't get it. Probably still wet behind the ears from parking fines." The room went still. Ethan winced. Maria's lawyer, a wiry public defender named Sanjay Patel, hid a grin. Abigail's pen paused over her notes, then tapped once, twice. She looked at Victor, her gaze ablade. "Mr. Langston," she said, "I'm not your darling. I'm the judge who's about to rule on your case. One more outburst and you'll be in contempt." Victor's smirk faded. He hadn't expected the steel in her tone. Ethan scrambled to recover, but the damage was done. Over 3 days, evidence stacked against Victor. Forged documents, bribed inspectors, a paper trail of fraud. Abigail's ruling came swift and brutal. $2 million in damages to the tenants. Criminal charges recommended. As bailiffs cuffed him, Victor glared at her, his voice low. "You'll pay for this." Jail didn't suit Victor Langston. The county lockup was a concrete box, its air sour with sweat and bleach. He lasted 2 nights before a visitor arrived, a man in a black overcoat, face shadowed by a fedora. He called himself Mr. Shade, and his offer was simple. Freedom, for a price. "We've watched you, Victor," Shade said, sliding a burner phone across the table. "You're useful. Join us, and these charges vanish. Refuse, and you rot." "Who's us?" Victor demanded, his cuffs clinking. "People who make Port Haven run. People above your pay grade." Victor took the phone. By morning, a clerical error sprung him. Charges dropped, warrants lost. He was back in his penthouse by noon, sipping bourbon, the phone heavy in his pocket. But the victory tasted off. Shade's call came that night. A meeting, midnight, at an abandoned cannery by the docks. The cannery reeked of fish and rust. Inside, a dozen figures waited, men and women in suits, faces obscured. Shade stepped forward. "Welcome to the network. We own this city, cops, council, courts. You're our new front man." Victor's gut twisted. He'd dodged justice before, but this was deeper, darker. They wanted him to push bigger projects, casinos, kickbacks, slums leveled for profit. Refusal wasn't an option. They'd framed him once. They could do it again. For weeks he played along, signing deals, shaking hands, hating every second. The tenants' faces, Maria's especially, haunted him. Abigail's too. Abigail Foster wasn't naive. She'd seen Victor walk free and smelled the rot. Port Haven's corruption wasn't news. Whispers of a network had circled for years. She dug quietly court records, tip-offs from clerks, a late-night chat with Sanjay. When a whistleblower dropped a thumb drive on her desk, recordings of Shade's meetings, she knew she had something big. But she needed more. She needed Victor. He came to her on a foggy November night, knocking on her chamber's door. She didn't flinch, just waved him in. "What do you want, Langston?" "To end this," he said, voice raw. "They own me. I'm done." "Why should I trust you? You shouldn't." "But I've got names, dates, proof. Use me or they'll bury us both." It was a gamble. Abigail took it. Over weeks, Victor fed her intel, wiretaps, ledgers, a map of the network's web. He testified in secret, his arrogance traded for something jagged, real. Arrests followed. Councilman, a deputy chief, even Ethan. The network crumbled, but not cleanly. Shade vanished, a ghost in the fog. March rolled in, gray and wet. Victor stood before Abigail again, not in cuffs, but as a witness. The courtroom was packed, reporters, tenants, the curious. Maria sat in the front row, her daughter beside her, watching the man who'd upended their lives help rebuild them. Abigail's gavel fell, sentencing the last of the network's foot soldiers. Victor exhaled. Outside, rain streaked the steps. Abigail approached, her coat pulled tight. "You're not off the hook, Langston. Civil suits are coming. You'll pay." "I know," he said, meeting her eyes. "I'm not running." She nodded, then turned away, disappearing into the mist. Victor lingered, the ocean roaring below. He'd lost his empire, his untouchable sheen. But for the first time, he felt the weight lift, just a little. Across town, Maria unlocked a new apartment, her daughter laughing. Up the coast, a black car idled, Shade's shadow behind the wheel. Port Haven breathed on, its secrets not gone, just shifted. Victor walked into the rain, a free man or something close. What came next, redemption, ruin, or something in between, was anyone's guess.